Welcome to the Bicurian Podcast. I am Eric.
And I'm Aisla.
And this week we're going to talk about the Philandering Feminist.
Yes, that is it.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about what this is.
Well, we're going to try to answer the question, can a man be both a cheating spouse and a feminist? And this is based on something that happened in the geek world. I don't know if you're geeky. Are you geeky, Eric?
I'm very geeky.
Yeah, me too. In August of 2017, Joss Whedon, god of geekery, was, and known for creating really strong female characters, was accused by his ex-wife of being a longtime cheater.
Wow. So here's the part where I pretend like I hadn't heard this, but of course I think everybody heard the news. I think we all knew in the world of Me Too that has been the battlefield of news. It feels like that one might have even gone a little under the radar because it wasn't a whole lot of victims or a whole lot of different things that happened, or even quite as high a profile person as some of the other people.
That's true. Well, the interesting thing here is not about injury. It's more about, are these things capable of coexisting?
So, from what I'm reading on our little show notes sheet here, you want to make the argument that he may not be able to be a feminist due to the injuries he caused to somebody else, while saying what a feminist he was.
Right. Like, Kai, that's his ex-wife's name. Her assertion is he's a hypocrite and is incapable of being feminist because of the way he treated her.
Gotcha.
And that's the question. And I also want to say, we don't really have time to talk about whether or not cheating is a good thing or all that kind of stuff. It's more, do those things contradict each other?
Yeah, I think we could just save cheating for its own show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But where's the contradiction? See, the Bicurian thing is there has to be something that seems inherently at odds.
I understand. So why don't you start with your definition of feminism?
Oh, no. We're not doing my definition of feminism. We're doing Merriam-Webster's definition of feminism.
That needs to be clarified going in. There's your disclaimer.
Well,
this is the Merriam-Webster definition of feminism, not Aisla's.
And not a school of thought or a philosophy. It's not new wave feminism or old wave guard feminism or any of that. Just if you look up the definition of feminism in the dictionary, what does it mean?
Why don't you tell us?
Okay. The theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. There's a second one. Organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests.
Got it. Okay, so the theory of political, economic, and social equality of the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
That one seems pretty straightforward. I mean, those are very small, narrow bands, right? Political, economic, and social equality. Like, no, I'm just kidding. They're not narrow at all.
Yeah, no, they're very narrow. It's just like those three small parts of the world.
Yeah. So, and then organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. So, why don't you elaborate on how you've seen that?
Why am I elaborating? Am I being set up?
No.
Okay.
How
I've seen
feminism? As a man,
okay.
I feel like I am doing the safest possible thing I can do right now by letting the woman define feminism for herself.
Letting me? Thank you. Thank you. That's really safe. I'm glad that you're letting me do that.
And that was a Freudian slip.
I can tell. Well, since you're letting me define it, thank you. I actually feel that feminism is exactly, it's about equality of the sexes, and in some case equity, because I definitely feel that there are some biological differences that we deal with. So I don't live in the school of 100% the sameness.
We might as well set our listeners up right off the bat to know that these are debates we have had offline from this show many times, and we've had this conversation. So I am aware of your feelings on this, and we do tend to agree that feminism is more about a right to choose things for yourself and based on your sex and maybe things that we have in our sexuality and in our actual biological sex, such as being more adept at giving children milk or the various different sorts of things like that that seem like we'll never overcome by political argument.
It's true. Well, and calling it feminism rather than humanism is a nod to the power inequities that have existed in the structure from my perspective. I would hope that over time we'd get to humanism as the larger approach.
Absolutely.
And right now, this seems like a step in that direction.
I will always be a fan of not needing to define isms by specifically one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be better off as a species.
And what I found interesting about the situation with Joss and Kai is he has been hugely influential in pop culture in terms of creating strong female characters, strong female leads. He's been honored as a feminist by Equality Now. He frequently gets asked at, Comic-Cons, why are you always writing strong women? He's like, because you keep asking that question. Like, he's been incredibly outspoken.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely seen that in a lot of the stuff that he's doing. So why don't we share some ideas of what we've actually seen him talk about?
So you should read his speech.
I should read his
speech?
speech?
Well, actually, not the whole speech, because that would take all the time we have, but just a little excerpt, maybe.
All right. Yeah, I can do that. So we have a little excerpt from the 2006 Equality Now Awards ceremony, and Joss gave this speech. This is just an excerpt. Equality is not a concept. It's not something we should strive for. It's a necessity. Equality is like gravity. We need it to stand on this earth as men and women, and the misogyny that is in every culture is not a true part of the human condition. It is life out of balance, and that imbalance is sucking something out of the soul of every man and woman who's confronted with it. We need equality. Kinda now.
It's pretty inspiring.
It's very inspiring.
You might think he's like a writer or something.
He's written things.
He has.
I've heard.
2 or 3. So it's interesting to me. They're honoring him for that.
Yes.
He's standing in front of hundreds of people accepting this award, and he's in the midst of constantly lying to his wife and cheating on her.
And we know that how? I mean, obviously we've seen that there's been information that's come out from Kai about the timeframes of this. So we know that this 2006 speech was probably at a very interesting time in his life as far as his philandering.
Yes. Well, and so to be fair or accurate, like Joss didn't release anything specific about this other than that his statement was something along the lines of, there are some inaccuracies. However, we're just going to accept this is what she wrote.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what Kai actually did right.
And it's very long. Very long.
We'll try to summarize it, and we'll put links in the show notes for all of this information.
So there's some key points that one of the things that he kind of talked about was, and according to her, he wrote a letter to her either after their divorce or during their divorce in which he confessed to all of this. And so she quotes theoretically this letter, which he doesn't contradict existing. So I'm going with there's some part of it that's at least accurate. And what's interesting to me is when he talks about it, he says, as a husband, I wanted to be with you like I had been. So I lived 2 lives. And that he had this feeling that as a man, he's taught to be a provider, companion, at the same time to conquer and acquire. So this whole idea that he's got to do this to be a man in our society. and that there was this part of him that was kind of proud of himself to be able to have this like stable life at home and then this like big conquest thing going on and to be able to have both. And that's where he was in terms of the relationship, according to if you put the timeline together,
Gotcha.
when he gave that speech. And so is it possible to be doing that and also be a feminist?
So, and this is the debate that and we've had this offline, and now we're going to have it online. I personally do not think that it harms his feminist credit at all. I think he harmed a person, but I do not believe that he necessarily harmed the movement that is feminism or even within his own beliefs. I just think he was kind of a jerk.
I completely agree with you that he was being a jerk to his wife. We are on the same page there.
I mean, assuming that they did not have an open relationship or anything negotiated there, that's pretty obvious.
Well, at this time, that's what she's saying.
Right.
That's all we know. However, I disagree with the fact, your statement that I take a different point of view in terms of, while I don't think he harmed feminism as a theory, because I actually don't think that can be harmed by a person, he didn't uphold those beliefs in his engagement with his wife.
That is true. Which begs the question, can you do something positive for a cause overall while not necessarily doing it on the micro level? He's obviously a macro feminist.
Yeah.
But maybe not a micro feminist.
But maybe not a micro feminist. And I yes, I think that's, for me, that's where I get to. That he can be someone who has a theory about feminism. And obviously he's had an amazingly powerful impact on a lot of young women. And,
I think he's even practiced it to a certain extent. In some ways, I mean, obviously just not all of them.
And what I find to be even more disturbing in some ways is that there's really one person that he made a commitment to treat well in a certain way. I mean, I guess you could argue marriage isn't about that, but he made that commitment, and then that's the one that he really kind of threw under the bus.
So I think the main issue that I have here is, I think it's clear that what he did to his wife was wrong. And this is going to bring up the much larger subject and something we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks of podcasts. But at what point can he do enough mea culpa, maybe, to have his message be more meaningful? Especially when we're talking about that speech was from 2006, and it is constantly reminding me of my daily aging to know that was 12 years ago right now.
It was 12 years ago.
And he's done so many different things, good and bad, such as Avengers, which I found was very good, and
now
and Justice League, and Justice League, which was not as good. But no, in all seriousness, as far as his feminist message, I think at some point, if he continues to fight the good fight, does that mean he can earn back some of this credit?
I don't know. I mean, did he lose it? I think for some people he didn't. And for me, it feels problematic. I was talking to a friend of mine who's she's pretty radical about this topic. And I asked her what her opinion was. And she said, what we like to say is, we can love problematic things. And I was like, I kind of like that.
See, and that right there, that is where I feel like we're at in society, is that if we're going to, and I'm not talking about, grievous, evil, illegal, there's certain realms that are not forgivable, but at the end of the day, if we literally or figuratively shoot everyone who slips or steps out of line, we could lose some really positive messages from them over time.
Firefly is still my favorite show.
I mean,
I'm just going to say.
He does some good work.
He does really good work. Well, and the other thing that I think is interesting is Esther Perel. I really love her approach. She does the mating in captivity work. Okay. And she has a quote that I love. It's, infidelity has a tenacity that marriage can only envy.
Yeah, we had some notes in here on the idea of cheating and things like that. And the fact of the matter is, um, I heard an NPR article or a news story the other day, and they were talking about it, and they said, first of all, when you can actually find enough people to admit that they cheat, the fascinating part about it is that they generally are not always completely unhappy with their sex life at home. They generally are not unhappy with their spouse or mate. They are looking for the thrill. And I think in a lot of ways, it's really tough. I would imagine there's quite a few people who'd have to look in the mirror and discuss their own infidelity that they've had and question why they've done it, and would not want to necessarily sit there and say, well, my beliefs in feminism, my beliefs in any kind of social justice work that I do, my beliefs in that I'm a good person are all completely jeopardized because I fell into this trap that clearly, to me, seems to have as much of a biological imperative as any kind of mental one.
Well, one of the reasons I like Esther a lot is one of the other quotes, and I'm going to mangle it, is something along the lines of, we would all protest during the day the things we like to do.
I saw that quote
in
it's
bed.
Fantastic.
And I appreciate that about her. And the other thing that I appreciate about her is that, and the reason that I brought it up is she talks about how there's also this other component to, from a feminist perspective, women are not encouraged to forgive a cheating spouse. And so there's this whole other layer of like, in this way, it kind of goes back to that, like on the micro level, no, you can't be a feminist and be a cheater, because a true-blooded feminist is going to have to like reject you for that. They can't forgive you, or they risk losing social status, or they get kind of lambasted for that. So it's complicated.
I agree. And, I think that's really the point of what we're going to be doing on this podcast, is really exploring some of these more complicated things, because they do definitely divide people and divide, culturally and create these dichotomies, which is what I loved about the concept when we were talking about this, just looking at the different things, more about the critical thinking. And maybe not just necessarily writing off somebody because they were a philandering feminist, but also maybe being more empirical about how we judge certain people based on their actions, and not necessarily just listen to the words they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and one of the topics I really want to do is, how do we separate the leader from the day-to-day? Like, if you look at history, I mean, there are lots of really great leaders who did really horrible things.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited about that one. But I think I can accept he's a feminist on the macro level and not the micro level as a reasonable solution to this.
I'm not even sure that I completely agree with my own positing of that theory. However, like I said, I think from my point of view, we need to be careful before we write off somebody that might have good ideas just because they are, in fact, fallible in some way.
Oh, that's a good point, because I'm pretty fallible. And I have 2 or 3 good ideas. So I guess if that's the standard, I can get on board with that.
Excellent. So we invite comments on this. Please share your thoughts on this. And if we get enough comments on it, we will be happy to revisit this subject and bring up some of that in our own debates.
That's true.
All right. So this week's thought of the week.
2 thoughts, one yours, one mine.
Exactly. So, mine's a rather interesting one because it's something kind of near and dear to me as I am dealing with some real estate things right now. But just in time, I heard an NPR news bit on CPR, actually, Colorado Public Radio, regarding housing prices and just how screwed we all are. Mm-hmm. There's no starter homes. There's no inventory. There's like nothing for an average home buyer. And we're down from a mid 70s a few years ago home ownership rate in Colorado to a 62%. And we're not the only ones. Our market is one of the third worst as far as inventory in the nation, second only to Seattle and San Francisco, two coastal cities that Denver is suddenly on par with all the time. But I really have been thinking a lot about this. It's a really interesting time as millennials are all moving towards the cities. I recently heard this. Like, that's the poll, is that millennials don't want to move to smaller towns. They all want to move into the cities. The bigger cities are all getting bigger, and it's really putting a housing crunch. They built 12,000 new houses in Colorado last year.
Wow.
And that's considered a tremendous shortage of new or available properties. These are houses built to be purchased, not apartments or that sort of thing. But it's a real problem.
Yeah. Well, and add to the fact that the flood decreased housing at the same time that the Colorado economy started having a huge influx.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a perfect storm of conditions.
Yeah, it's really nuts. And it's making me wonder exactly what's going to happen. I always thought living in Colorado was a great place to be because we're sheltered from that sort of thing. I work at my day job for a Silicon Valley startup in the Bay Area. And I mean, two of my coworkers have moved out here in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. Realistically, that's just the trend right now. And Denver is on par with becoming a city that people will lump in with Seattle and San Francisco. So it's an interesting thing. I've been thinking a lot about it.
Well, I mean, the upside is we get better concerts.
We do. We're not just flyover country anymore.
Not so much anymore. Interestingly, the other challenge on par with that, and probably part of the housing issue, is that incomes are not rising.
That's
with the cost of living.
That's actually what they said was the biggest problem, is that nowadays to afford a home, people are in so deep with what their mortgage is versus their income, and wages really need to start going up. But I don't see how that gets influenced unless people start turning down jobs based on, though that's not enough money. But I mean, we're all still kind of, I think, reeling from the 2008 and 9 recession when, you know, any job will do. If it's even remotely close to what you're worth, you'll take it. And Colorado was hit really hard by that. So out here, the mentality is, man, whatever you pay me, that'll be enough.
Yep. And that's not, we'll see. I think we'll see some changes. And it is an interesting situation to be in. People I know that have been trying to buy houses end up in bidding wars.
Yeah.
Paying significantly more than the house listed for, or even maybe necessarily more than it was valued at.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing. I'm really curious to watch how it develops. And it seems like every year as we're heading into the new buying and selling season here in spring, it just gets a little worse.
Yeah. So I was trying to think, what am I thinking about? Because, you know, Handmaid's Tale. I've been watching Handmaid's Tale, Hulu series.
Yeah.
And it fits in some ways with the topic for me. There is a lot in that around the complexities of feminism as a concept and the way that they present how a very modern society could easily become a totalitarian oppressive regime with just a few very simple actions on the part, you know. And so, you know, and it's funny because a friend of mine and I were talking about it, and she said, that's so impossible and crazy. And then she's like, wait a minute, that happened in Turkey and Afghanistan in my lifetime. It's like, it did. And so just watching it from that perspective of, we've seen this happen in the world, and the scenarios that they set up to create it are not out of character.
Yeah, it's definitely a show I want to watch. And I admit I didn't know too much about it until you explained some of the basic premise of it. And I've kind of relegated it into the segment of my brain for horror movies and horror shows because it sounds like it's actually really scary.
It is. It's really scary, partially because it seems quite possible.
Yeah.
And then there are ways in which the complexities that they present, for instance, one of the characters who's part of the new regime says, you know, we were trying to build a better world. We knew it wouldn't be better for everyone. We hoped it would be better for most people. And that acknowledgement that whenever you try to do something, it hurts someone. Better for this group may not be better for that group. It's a really fascinating way to approach the whole topic.
Yeah. Yep, definitely on my watch list. Definitely want to get on that page with you, and I can be horrified as well.
Oh, you'll definitely be horrified, and then they'll have these moments where you sort of, for me anyway, I think, "Whoa, there is something about that feels kind of compelling." Like they did simplify things, and simple is nice.
Yeah, I think most totalitarian regimes would actually probably win some merits for their simplification of situations.
Yeah, thanks for phrasing it just like that. I appreciate it. It's a fair point. It's a really fair point.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in this week. And as usual, leave us your comments. Let us know if you have any thoughts, ideas for topics, agreements, disagreements. And we look forward to talking to you on our next podcast.
See you soon.